In the program. Good evening. My name is Sarah Rahaman Shaikh, and I am an English honours student of Ranibilla Girls College under Calcutta University. I welcome you to the Stories of Tribal Identity and Culture that will explore the role of tribal art and tribal representation in art in shaping cultural identity, ideology, curated under TMYS Review June 2024 in collaboration with the Center for Asia Pacific Initiatives, University of Victoria. We are also calling for submission of essays, poems, and short stories under the project. To know more about the submission guidelines and the project architecture, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. This evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists, Dr. Annapurna Garimella, Pinaki De, and Professor Ritwik Balo, who will shortly share their views and insights with us. The topic for today's discussion is Indigenous Presence or Symbolism in Modern Art, Graphics, Cartoons, and Films under the sub-theme Tribal Representation in Art. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker for the session is Dr. Annapurna Garimella. Annapurna Garimella is an art historian and a designer. Her research focuses on late medieval Indic architecture and the history and practices of vernacular vision and built cultures in India after independence. Garimella is the managing trustee of Art, Resources and Teaching Trust, a not for profit organization dedicated to art and conducts independent research projects. She also heads Jackfruit Research and Design, an organization with a specialized portfolio of design, research, and curation. Jackfruit's recent curatorial projects include vernacular in the contemporary and mutable ceramic and clay art in India since 1947. We are delighted to have you on the panel, ma'am. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you
Our
so
second
much.
speaker, for the session is Pinaki De. Pinaki De is a graphic illustrator designer who regularly works for renowned publishers like Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Hachette, Rotling, Primus, Oxford University Press, Singapore University, Worldview, Orient Black Swan, Sahitya Academy, Rupa, and many others. He has designed almost 500 book covers to date. He is the winner of the Publishing Next Prize for the Best Book Cover Design in India twice in 2017 and 2019. He won the prestigious Oxford Bookstore Prize for the Best Cover Design in India at Jaipur Literary Fest 2017 and finished runners up in 2021. His layout design on Sahitya Rai's archival manuscripts has drawn accolades from all across the globe. A Charles Wallace Trust Fellow, his PhD is on comic theory. Pinaki De is one of the editors of the prestigious annual magazine, Longform, Volume 1 and Volume 2, published by HarperCollins and Penguins respectively. He is the Indian comic advisor of Mangasia, the biggest ever exhibition on Asian comics curated by Paul Gravett for the Barbican, London. Pinaki juggles his creative work with academics as he has a day job as an associate professor at Raja Piri Mohan College, Uttarpara. Presently, he is working on his book length work on partition. We are delighted to have you on the panel, sir. Thank you for joining us this evening. Our third speaker for the session is Professor Ritwik Balo. Ritwik Balo is an assistant professor of English at Ranibilla Girls College. His interests are graphic narratives, rock music, artificial intelligence, and hydroponics. He has been awarded the National Junior Research Fellowship by the Government of India to conduct doctoral research. He has published many articles and been a part of both national and international conferences. Few of his works include Hegemony of the Tech Age, Biopolitics of Media in Global Media Journal, Indian edition under Calcutta University. His journalist works are Review of Bappaditya Bandhopadhyay's Shohra Bridge for Cine Bengal magazine and Campus Casteism, How Professor Mandal is Fighting Back for Roundtable India. We are delighted to have you on the panel, sir. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
We will now open the forum for discussion. I would request Dr. Annapurna Garimella to share her insights. Ma'am, over to you now.
Yeah, so let me just see if I can present. Share screen. Let me see. Share screen. Mm, Window. Okay, I think this is fine. I just have 4 slides I want to share, so let me just start off with. The session is called about Indigenous symbolisms and in modern art and in graphic design, comics, whatnot. So actually, I thought I would begin by questioning a little bit the idea that indigenous things aren't modern, or that they were not made in the modern world, and perhaps really even questioning the idea of indigenous. Um, I know we get 10 minutes, so let me just make a few things clear. What is indigenous? It's a word that has been rejected a little bit by the Indian anthropological community because when we think about, say, for example, Gond, there's good evidence that the Chandelas were the kings who made Khajuraho were Gond from the Gond community. There are Gond kings. So normally we think of indigenous as having a certain kind of stability of place and land and role in a given society or in a given geography. But indigenous people also move. So this idea of indigenous is cannot be used without putting a lot of caveats. Another idea is this idea that something that comes from a community such as Gond or Pradhan or even the Jogi community or Madhubani is not modern. In fact, I want to show you 4 slides which very clearly illustrate modern history, the modern development, the modern art language of 4 different forms of community or inherited paintings or community-based art or whatever you want to call it. So this is the Jogi family. This is actually Ganesh Jogi's own work. He was not a trained artist, or this isn't a hereditary style. It's not community art in that sense. He began making art in the context of Hakusha, encouraging him to make a livelihood. And if you look at the art that he's making, it's the first time he held a rotering pen. And this is a constant experience for any artist, is when you encounter a new technology, it's thrilling. So when he held a rotering pen, it was so thrilling. But the use of the rotering pen is very close to textiles, like um, this stitching that is just a running stitch or looping stitch and little crisscrosses. So there's an interesting connection being made from a way of thinking graphically. Embroidery is graphic thought, um, and it's very graphic because the surface of a cloth functions as the background against which the graphic image is made. There's a grid in place, very often like graphic design, the warp and the weft, and he's somehow connected in his own lifetime. He's no longer alive, but his whole family of artists, including his very famous artist Beju, daughter of Ganesh Jogi and his wife, is a fine artist in her own right. They all see it as the Jogi family style, so that's one history. If we go to, say, someone like Shanti Bai, who comes from the Gond community, and they do tattoos for um, for people in the community, and it's called Godna, this tattoo tradition. And to earn this many tattoos as a woman, you would need to go through an entire lifetime. And each set of markings on the body would be associated with various passages of time. And because at a moment when I asked to work with her, I asked her, could you please, I had the opportunity to work with her, could you please render these on paper? She had already been doing stuff like this, but she did a whole body, and that became something that she's very well respected and known for. So this is not something that she traditionally did, but this is something that she invented in conversation with the curator, and it's basically her own ideas that came out of that kind of a conversation. Now, when we think about something like Jangar Singh Sham and Bhaju Sham and Ramesh Dekam and all the wonderful Durgabai Sham and all the wonderful Pardhan Gond painters that are so famous today, and their work is so well received in various international and national and local museums and art galleries, and books like Tara publications and Bhimrao Ambedkar's life story. So it also comes out of a context in which wall painting was common to the community, and it was Jangar Singh Sham's inventiveness in the late part of the 20th century, the encouragement he received from other artists, and particularly J. Swaminathan, his own interest in exploring new media. He was at Bharat Bhavan, so he kept attending workshops in various things like printmaking, and of course, he was completely thrilled when he encountered color, because color is synthetic color, and color of any kind is a modern form. Synthetic color was invented very late in the 19th century and rapidly was developed to have many, many, many shades. And encounter with that much color has always been thrilling for shoppers as well as for artists. And finally, when we think about something like Madhubani painting moving from the wall to paper, that happened because um, as part of economic relief, uh, Pupul Jaikar sent artists like Bhaskar Kulkarni and Manu Parekh and brought paper to women who were the historic painters of this art, upper caste women primarily. And these women then transferred it to paper, and gradually a school was set up, the Mithila Art Institute. Manu Parekh helped um, people from lower caste or Dalit communities access paper and developed a format that they could use and make some art for and sell. So all of this work, in what sense might we use the word indigenous is something we have to question, and is isn't it already graphic aplenty? And if we are, for example, moving it into the realm of graphic art in order to make it more comfortable to take these languages and use them in other formats, for example, in digital forms or whatever. I think there's a new book that's come out called Indigenous. It's called Inspirations for Graphic Design from India by Jaya Jaitley and Dimple Shah. And it was a small excerpt of about this new book was published on January 3rd, 2024 in the Voice of Fashion website. And essentially, uh, it is to look at all these media as all these modes of art, of graphic art, as eminently modernizable. And I totally reject that because it sets it up for not acknowledging the fact that there's a profound graphic sensibility internal to all these art forms. So, if we're going to figure out how to work with these art forms in new ways that people who are trained in art and design schools can do, then that acknowledgement that there's an internal graphic sensibility and logic and thinking must be acknowledged. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and thank you for inviting me and listening to me.
Uh, Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful observation. I will now request Pinaki De to share his insights. So, over to you now.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I agree with Annapurna. I mean, I completely agree with the way, things are happening. So, when I started comic studies, I was a bit of a lone kind of a ranger. Nobody did comics, doctorate in comics and all that. And someone directed me towards certain books. and you come across Vimayana and all that. It was just been sort of published by Navayana. So, and I looked at it, and then of course, looking at that, made me retrace the path back towards what kind of art it sort of, and then I sort of stumbled upon Jangar Singh Sham and all these amazing artists. One of the problems that I have faced, and I have seen all the Tara books, and one of the problems I face with kind of the ideology of the making of Tara books is the way they yank that art, out of that context and then sort of reframe it according and tailor made it to suit certain tastes. Okay, and it's kind of a consistent kind of a phenomena that is happening, and a lot of books. I'll just show you some examples. So let me share my screen a bit. Uh, how do I see it? Okay. So can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So
We can see your screen.
I have this, so what happened was, and although this is not exactly tribal art, but Potua art, and which is like developed in West Bengal, in Midnapur. And of course, Pingla is a kind of a village that has now been sort of been the center of that art. And then Tara Books actually went to those places, picked up the artists, and they came up books like this. I don't know whether you can see the book. This is, of course, by Mono Chitrakar, and it's called I See the Promised Land. And it's incidentally the life story of Martin Luther King Jr. So you take photo art, you put a painter. It's almost like you are commissioning a painter to do certain works. They are instructed to paint certain scenes, and then there is, if you look at this, Arthur Flowers is of course an artist, a singer who tells the story of Martin Luther King Jr. And then you have Rossi, the designer, who puts that all in. Now, this kind of collaboration sound very egalitarian, and brilliant at first. But if you just go through it, you will find there are a lot of issues in the way things are arranged within the book, and the things are sort of almost cut pasted to suit certain sensibilities. One of the books that really did well, and is of course Bhajju Shyam, and I want to show this book. It's called The London Jungle Book. This was Tara's one of the most famous books. It won awards in Bologna Children Fest and all that, and it became a kind of a bestseller abroad as well. Now, if you look at this book, and there is a backstory to it, Bhajju was actually, made to travel to London to sort of decorate a kind of an Indian restaurant there. And then, he went to London for the first time. And then as he went to London, he encountered certain things which he sort of transferred to his own kind of art. So, for example, it's a fantastic kind of book. So if you look at, say, the end papers of the book, you can see the will, and the way Bhajju has represented the will. Um, or for example, I'll just give you a beautiful example of the double-decker bus, who is like the loyal kind of dog, because it always skips the time according to Bhajju. Now, the art is, of course, not a problem. Art is brilliant. And as you can easily understand with Bhajju, the imagination is fertile. But the text that goes, you can easily see that it is, almost like instructed. It is almost like put to use, and, catered, put to use in such a way that there will be a kind of an audience for it. Okay. So that is where I think I feel a bit uncomfortable. So when I, for example, I went to Patanga, for example, and I saw their art, Pradhan Khan's art in action, even in the villages. And then, of course, when they transfer it to the book, they undergo workshops and all that kind of paraphernalia that is needed to get that kind of professional output. So the problem I face is that the way they are almost chaperoned, to, of course, Jhangar and of course Bhajju are great artists. I'm not questioning that, but I'm questioning the way these books are actually made. I'm sorry, I'm actually, concentrating on Tara because they are basically the leading kind of producers of that kind. So you have wonderful kind of art. Say, for example, the London Metro is represented like this, the king of the underworld, and you can easily understand how that transfer is taking place. I have no problem about the metaphor. The transfer is really fertile and inventive. But if you look at the way the text goes, and it sort of really, undercuts the visuals, there is a bit of discomfort for me. So whenever, what Annapurna, tells us is actually, quite right. Even I, as a graphic designer, when I am sort of doing certain things in a certain way, people come up with the brief and say that you have to somehow put that element in without understanding the context, without understanding the meaning, without understanding the way these things are actually happening. What I seek to sort of project here is that we need to be very careful when we use these indigenous symbolism. One of the experiences that, most strange experiences we had is when we were editing this book called Long Form. And in Long Form 1 we actually put Venkat Shyam. We commissioned Venkat Shyam to do something for us, and we just never gave him a brief, and he came up with this amazing picture of Dharti Ma. It was very complex, and and we as editors didn't know what to do with it. And when I asked Venkat and said that, this is probably too complex and prolix for the lay viewer, Venkat said that this is the way our world is. I mean, you have to look at it from from our point of view. I mean, even if you cannot make sense of all of it, let there be that kind of ambiguity left, because if you explain everything through words and everything, it becomes a bit of a problem. So we sort of overcame the problem by just interviewing him and just, making him not only talk about his painting, but about the techniques and everything that is sort of employed. So one of the questions that you should really put when you actually use indigenous symbolism haphazardly, yank it out of the context, is the veracity of it all. I mean, whether it is sustainable as a kind of a, whether it is sustainable, first of all, and whether it's making a real impact in terms of the ecosystem from where it comes from. So, one of the things that I also want to point out, so if you look at this, this kind of books, say, for example, look at this beautiful kind of image that Venkat makes in the London Jungle Book. I've just scanned the entire book. It's like a visual delight. So what I'm trying to say here is, hello. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say here is almost what Annapurna told me. I mean, tells us first that it is all fine, to sort of, put this out in the open and everything. Of course, galleries are all appropriating them in many ways as it is possible. But somehow, I think it is also becoming a bit of a fad. And that kind of, if it is too much of a fad, it sort of loses that kind of depth that it has. So talking with Venkat gave me a kind of a sense that the imageries, the use of colors, even the use of indigenous materials, everything is imbued with a kind of community life, lifestyle, the way they lead their life and everything. And we are really not able to sort of understand it. We are not trying to understand that, just trying to sort of revel in the colors and the kind of the flowery art that they are trying to make. So I think there should be a kind of a, I personally always try to censor myself to a kind of a, the indiscriminate use of those kind of symbolism in my own graphic art. I mean, I would not sort of put in one of the Gond elements, just in order to make a kind of a point. That kind of indiscriminate use is actually happening now. because it seems like a fad. So once we kind of come to a kind of a deeper understanding of their art, I think we will make a bit better kind of a progress, in terms of understanding their life and maybe understanding their art as well. Another point that I really want to make is that, in comic studies, for example, we study Vimayana now, and of course, comics, as you all know, Vimayana is a slightly different kind of sequential narrative, okay, because it uses what is called Digna, that kind of separation block, which is very different from what a Western comics is. And I find my students unable to completely get it. They just want to impose that kind of Western comics concept and, try to read Vimayana, the art of Vimayana, frankly, in a very kind of a bowdlerized way. And I don't like that. But, even after, telling them and looking at that, showing them stuff, they seem to unable to get it. And I can completely understand, because, coming from a completely different urban context and from a completely different art background, it is sometimes difficult to cross over. But that is where your effort comes in. You need to somehow go there and maybe experience certain things, which is irreplaceable. No kind of art books is going to teach say, for example, the wall painting of Santalis. Beautiful art, and if you look at them, they have their own sequentiality. So when Vinod Bihari in Shantiniketan is actually drawing that huge scroll on Shantiniketan and is getting inspired by tribal art, he knows the stuff because he is looking at it every day. He's almost living life with them, and he's not appropriating them in that sense, but he's just using them as a kind of a reference material in certain ways. That kind of engagement is slightly different from the kind of engagement we are having now with indigenous art forms and their symbolisms. And the last point I want to make, because I just like Annapurna, I was very, very unhappy with the title. I don't like the title at all. I mean, even this talk tries to sort of play up the thing that we are trying to go against. I personally don't like the way this kind is projected as what I call, a bit of a sacrosanct kind of material, which needs to be banded to a certain section and, done up in a certain way. I'm sorry. Thank you for that. Probably I rambled a bit more, but that's what I wanted to say.
Sure, sir. I completely agree, Bill. It's so true. Thank you so much for your insightful observations. I would now request Professor Ritwik Balo to share his insights, sir. Over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Some very valuable insights shared by Dr. Garimella and Dr. Pinaki De. So I would share my 2 cents by touching upon concerns of authenticity, something already touched upon by the previous speakers. And perhaps I will also talk about a little bit about the interaction between indigenous art and technology. So when we speak of authenticity, especially in this case, the context of tribal art, we are often referring to a very sort of diverse tapestry of traditional techniques, materials, and even storied narratives that are deeply entrenched in the cultural fabric of whichever community we are referring to at any instance. So, and the transition to digital mediums initiates a conversation about the integrity of these art forms, of course. So we can consider, for example, the intricate worldly paintings of Maharashtra, which are characterized by simple geometric shapes like circles, triangles, and such. This art form is traditionally done on mud walls with rice paste and bamboo sticks, capturing themes of daily life and harvest and festivals. Importantly, these paintings are not just art, they are also a visual language which has a unique rhythm and syntax that has been developed over centuries. Now, digitizing these could, of course, mean preserving their form, but potentially losing their essence, right? Which is something, and that has already been talked about. So the warmth of the artist's hand, for example, the imperfections in the rice paste, the texture of the mud wall, all of that just gone. Now, we can think of digitizing worldly art as similar to translating poetry from one language to another. While the words may remain, the rhythm and the cultural context might, as they often do, get lost in translation. And so we have a conundrum. How do we digitize without sterilizing, right? So, reflecting on the critique that Dr. Shah already shared, the appropriation of tribal and folk art in modern comics as well raises such questions about authenticity. The use of traditional art styles in comics might risk decontextualizing these art forms, turning them into commodities, right? As Dr. Dev was pointing out, a bit of a fad perhaps. So for the global markets. This echoes the conundrum I mentioned earlier, ensuring that the soul and context of tribal art is not diluted in these digital incarnations. So we can see that digital transition or appropriation poses unique challenges. For example, uh, digitizing tribal art can sometimes lead to homogenizing of diverse cultural experiences where distinct regional styles might be overshadowed by popular or even mainstream digital art trends. As we increasingly digitize cultural products, we must tread carefully, ensuring that the soul of tribal art isn't lost in this process of translation. So you see, the question isn't just about the medium, but also about the message. And in the digital realm, can we have to ask ourselves if we can maintain the narratives and cultural nuances that these art forms carry, or do we perhaps risk reducing them to mere exotic designs removed from their stories and significance? Um, I wanted to touch upon, the interaction between traditional art forms and technology. The advent of digital tools and platforms, it is quite similar to sort of opening a window to a global audience. It is perhaps a little bit uh, like a protective economy accepting economic liberalization. And at face value, it appears that this digital leap often offers a canvas not constrained by geographical boundaries, and you'd expect that it would enable indigenous art to tell its stories far and wide. Consider the vibrant Madhubani paintings from Bihar. Uh, Traditionally, these were confined to the walls of rural homes, as we have seen before, or even perhaps the pages of local art collectors. Now, digitization has catapulted them into global market in the global market, from online art galleries to social media feeds. And if you bank with SBI, you might even be aware that Madhubani art has made its way to debit card skins and card holders, right? So, by the looks of it, this digital exposure is not just about showcasing art, it's about sharing a culture's heartbeat, right, in a way. Now, in this context, I think innovative digital technologies, digital solutions like virtual reality, VR exhibitions also offer a novel way for audiences to experience tribal art, providing a kind of immersive journey through cultural landscapes that sort of birthed these art forms. But then again, this brings us back to the question of authenticity versus adaptation. As tribal art um, embraces digital forms, how much of its soul should evolve to resonate with a global audience? We could, think about the problematic use of worldly tribal art in advertising, for example. So some years back, a Coca-Cola ad used worldly art to celebrate Diwali, right? Very much detaching it from its cultural significance. So such instances underscore the need for careful and respectful integration of tribal art in digital platforms, ensuring that commercialization does not overshadow cultural authenticity. Uh, and if there's anything fundamental to the digital world, it is how rapidly evolving the landscape of digital art is, right? So from the emergence of cryptocurrency, NFTs, and artificial intelligence more recently, there has been a reshaping of the market where there is a demand for such art. And I'll quickly share a few thoughts before I end my time. Let me begin with NFTs, which is, in my opinion, a double-edged sword. In theory, NFTs have opened a new realm of possibilities for all artists, including tribal artists, of course. So by tokenizing their artwork, in theory, artists can assert ownership and receive royalties, addressing long-standing issues around copyright and profits. For instance, a recent project called Walking Between Worlds involved tokenizing Aboriginal art as NFTs, and this allows for global exposures while ensuring that artists from the community retain the copyrights and also continue to receive their due royalties. And This kind of collection, the collection I was referring to, Walking Between Worlds, it includes more than 2,000 unique NFTs showcasing traditional Aboriginal dance vogues. The collection also includes unique pieces which include indigenous poetry or soundscapes to help create a sort of immersive cultural experiences. And this project works with indigenous communities to help them capitalize on the NFT market, leading to, well, again, in theory, financial inclusion and self-determination for indigenous artists. Other similar projects working with tribal artists in the NFT space include 400 Drums and Indige NFT, which whose stated purpose is, to preserve and promote indigenous culture by bridging the gap between indigenous communities and new emerging decentralized technologies, especially NFTs, Web 3.0, and even the metaverse. However, as we all know, these digital leaps do come with new challenges, and the carbon footprint associated with NFTs raises environmental concerns as well. And I wanted to raise this issue, especially because for many of these communities, they are deeply connected to nature. Furthermore, the concept of owning a digital token as art, as opposed to a physical piece, can be at odds with communal and shared cultural values intrinsic to many of the tribal societies. So I will end by saying a few words about artificial intelligence's role in tribal art. So AI's foray into the art world presents a fascinating and yet complex scenario. On one hand, artificial intelligence can aid in preservation and analysis of tribal art, offering insights into patterns, themes, and historical context. So, for instance, reinforcement learning algorithms may be able to help in reconstructing damaged or incomplete ancient tribal artworks. On the other hand, the use of that same machine learning in creating art raises questions about, authenticity and originality. So that is sort of my 2 cents on this topic.
The
Thank you
next,
very much, sir, for your
Yeah.
insightful observation. We will now move on to the question and answers session. The first question is,
One thing, I mean, before sort of,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I'm
sure, sure.
sorry for this. I mean,
Mhm.
to point out, Ritwik was talking about NFTs and all that. I was just thinking about a much kind of a less complicated way of doing things well. One of the best kind of rendition of community life and the way this indigenous art everything came out. I saw this exhibition by Gauri Gill, and if you see Gauri Gill's work, especially a work called Fields of Sight with Rajesh Vangad. Rajesh is basically an artist, a Rajasthani community artist, and Gauri, of course, as you all know, is a brilliant photographer. They collaborated in a certain way. They did these beautiful installation pieces, which I think somehow doesn't interfere with that kind of too much with the idea of the problem for authenticity. I think much more easier solutions with installations and all that, instead of going for very complex kind of digital solutions. That's something that I wanted to tell, because sometimes the lesser complex solutions are not sexier to sound, but I think it's probably much more easier to do.
I'd like to say something. Very interesting presentations, both by Ritwik and Pinaki. So thank you so much. It's an interesting, very interesting conversation. Um, I want to say a couple of words. A word like authenticity can become a trap. Uh, why it becomes a trap is because it has a tendency to be very judgmental of change.
Mm.
And all artists, creative people, human beings, um, in order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to be human, have to change.
Right.
So when we look at any community in India,
Mm.
whether I've spoken about the Pradhans, the Gonds, if in some of the online images, if you just stream, you see that somebody in Madhubani is now picking up Chantal body form in painting it on walls there. So they have been changing um, in many different ways. I've just been reading histories of tantric practices in Buddhism and the rise of tantra, and it's so closely engaged with tribal practices of goddess worship, and tribal practices evolved to gain that power that tantra offered them, and tantra got access to a certain kind of um, uh, another kind of power by engaging with goddess worship of different kinds. So I'm really careful. Rather than the word authenticity, I'd like to explore a word like sincerity, which is a lot softer as a word. And it's a little bit, it gives artists a lot of space, any kind of artist, a lot of space to be different, to keep moving, to keep changing, right? Um, Another thing I really would like you and you as an organization, I'm not sorry, I don't know huge amounts about your organization or the platform, but and also the audiences is that people who are practicing outside of the gallery format, outside of the published format, have their own ideas about intellectual property. I
Right.
wrote an article about this. For example, there was is a bronze maker in Tamil Nadu. When I was working on an exhibition with him, he did this remarkable project. You can go on academia.edu and see that essay there. Um, so he didn't want to give himself credit. He gave it to his father, who was not a hereditary bronze artist in Swami Malay. He was from Erode in Tamil Nadu. Why did he want to give it to his father? Because he was reconstituting patrilineal craft, right? But by giving it to his father, the credit, if you understand the way that Hindu family law works, that would be whatever is earned from that kind of copyright would be then spread across the entire family, right? Because that's the way the law works. So there's a lot of creativity in how all these things are being formulated within the artist community itself. There's a book that Tara Books did about museums and the way that indigenous people approach museums. If you read between the lines, there's so much interesting critique of both Tara and the museum, but also a love of the museum. It's
Yeah.
home
Yeah.
to the artists now. It's
Right.
their home. Their home isn't in Mandla in that sense, right?
Right.
It's in the museum for their work. I mean, their home can be in different things in different moments, and for different ways. And then the third thing I think I just want to say before you move on to your questions is that um, artists, when they're collaborating with other kinds of artists, and this isn't just about artists from this particular sector of art making, it's a hard relationship. In the last 10 years, two topics in contemporary art, and I consider this art contemporary art. That's been my argument ever since I curated this exhibition for vernacular and the contemporary. This is contemporary art. This is very much engaged with. It's not cute art. It's critical. It's thinking. It's addressing technology. It's addressing markets. It's doing all sorts of things. So when contemporary artists of any kind collaborate either with each other or diagonally in other sectors of making, it's very complex. For example, who gets to be the artist in a relationship between a gallery artist who has a concept and a fiber artist who knows, fiberglass artist who knows the medium in a way that the gallery based artist could never handle. So these are not settled questions. And if we try to settle them, we lose the opportunity to have productive debates that provide windows, doorways to make everybody more thoughtful, intelligent, potentially, not guaranteed, and also potentially provide opportunities for real income generation. And let's not ever poo poo opportunities for real income generation. Because there's a way that the market is thinking about income generation as though um, people who are making the kind of art forms we're discussing today. I call them vernacular. We don't have to call them vernacular. We can call them anything we want. Um, it- uh, it's just almost to say this is just like air that's floating around. Nobody needs to pay for it. But look what happens when we don't pay for groundwater. We're sucking the life out of the earth. Look what happens when we don't pay for clean air. We don't think about the cost of dirty air. So I want people to think that it's not correct that worldly art can be just taken up because it's already been intervened and modified and created enough by people like Jivya Somamashe and other people in order for then Coca-Cola to access it to make it into an advertisement, right? It's already gone through many transitions. Somebody paid with their life's work to make that possible. Somebody made that their life's work to make that possible. I want that kind of acknowledgement, not just to be coming out as a kind of footnote or a pleasant thing to say or even a true thing to say, but actually let's reflect on what are the economics of acknowledging that truth. Then how do things change? Let me thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I agree. I personally feel that the whole my point. I agree with you, but one thing I also want to talk about, because I don't come from that place, right? So for me, the engagement is always from a different location. So whenever I talk about this, I get a bit tentative. I get a bit defensive as well. Frankly, to be honest, I mean, however you can acquire, however knowledge you can acquire, it's something that is always from a different point of view. So when I am looking at it, so that is why I mentioned Gauri Gill's exhibition, because Gauri never wanted to go in them. She just collaborated with that artist and sort of created this both words simultaneously. You can look at that and see how she does it. So what I'm trying to say is that of course everything will change, and it's of course it should be there. And the galleries, the whole thing that they are going to the galleries, even that's amazing. I mean, that's great. It's not something to be sort of scoffed at because it is losing authenticity. That's not the question. The question is, how you as a person is locating that art, and how you as a person is actually taking that art in because of certain kind of pandering that is happening with respect to that art. That's the problem. And I don't think the problem is the change that they are instituting. That's completely, I mean, of course, granted. I mean, that's what we all do. That's, I mean, you cannot just think of tribal art as some kind of a glass house where nothing can change. It cannot be just like that primitive form which will never ever go. Look at Potu art, for example. If you look at this new Potu artists, of course they are not tribal form, but if you look at new Potu artists, they are now more urbanized. They are in IDs and all that. They are studying other arts, and everything is coming together in their own way. And so it's not their problem. It's also, I think, our problem, the way we sort of appropriate. That's I think, a very important question. Sorry, I just.
Splendid.
I agree. I think that it's nice to share the problem.
Yes, thank you so much. It is actually an honor to hear out all your intriguing views. It's splendid. Thank you so much. Now we will move on to the question and answer session. The first question is for Dr. Annapurna Garimella. Ma'am, related to your foundation of Indian contemporary art, how do you manage to keep a balance between your cultural appropriation and cultural representation mixed with modern graphic art? We just talked about it, but again, could you just briefly?
So I don't run a foundation called Foundation for Indian Contemporary Art. I'm an art historian, and I run two organizations. One is Jackfruit Research and Design, and then I run a public art a trust, which is like research library. It's based out of Bangalore, and it's fundamentally only about books. So I don't run any foundation. I actually don't much work with any gallery, or most of my recent work has been looking at exploring ideas. For example, Mutable was about the history of clay as a medium since 1947 in the realm of industrial artist studios, studio pottery, and hereditary craftsmanship, hereditary craftspeople. A current project is about Connaught Place and the history of Connaught Place. Another book I'm working on is a collection of South Asian masks. So I tend to not work so much specifically. There's enough people working in contemporary art. They don't need me. Uh, but I do understand and try to keep thinking through issues. Like, I think one of the important things that Pinaki's pointing out. See, in India, there are not enough institutions that raise critical questions of artists. If you go to any museum, uh, whether it's one of the new ones or even the old established ones, it's all about celebrating the artist.
Mm.
So if we are going to put the entire burden of asking critical questions on artists,
Mm.
then it's a little unfair. It's unfair. So when I speak about collaboration and the complexities of collaboration, it's not just artists and another artist or a maker of one kind and a maker. What about the institutions that bring these people in? And for example, when Vasvo X Vasvo was showing
Mm.
the work that he does with his entire karkhana, they only
Yeah.
want to put his name. So he goes with a pen and he writes all their names in, right? And then and then he has a structure, and he elaborates very publicly the structure of payments and how
Mm.
everything works and all these kinds of things.
Mm.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
The real issue is, and this will change. There will be people from these communities who will become art historians and curators soon. It's not that far away.
Yes. Yes.
And that once that happens,
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that one person. Not everybody will be,
Mm.
leading the new revolution. Let's not get carried away here. But somebody will come along. Like I came along as a woman born in 1966 to say, why can't I become a PhD? And why can't I ask the difficult questions about, like, I'm trained in a very classical institution, and why do I always have to work with marble statues? Why can't I work with other things, right? Or why can't marble statues tell other stories? It could be anything. So I think once this kind of stuff happens, these kinds of things will eventually open out. Now, I haven't answered that person's question because it's not necessary for me to answer it in that sense. But I understand where it's not that it's a bad question. It's that I think somewhere we've covered that question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Um the next question is for Pinaki De. According to you, what are the best ways for an artist to use symbolism in modern graphic art to convey messages about Indigenous identity, resilience, or social issues? Give instances of modern graphic art in the context of your personal experience or insight.
I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I don't know what is the best. Frankly, no. I mean, for us, it's, since I work in trade publishing mostly, right? I work on books and in trade publishing, and there's a lot of pressure, sales and everything. So there is, I as an artist, of course, work on certain stuff which are not always shown, are not always published. They undergo a lot of kind of pruning and everything. I think this the same goes with advertising agencies, and so there is this very interesting ad that came out with Exide. Okay, Exide. India runs on Exide, and if you look at that ad, it's created by Wonderman Thompson, Calcutta, and I know the artist. His name is Shovish Mitra. Is brilliant. But I mean, it won awards hold full of awards in Cannes and all that. But the problem is, again, it works in a certain way, right? But I mean, there is not any singular way where you can say that this is the best thing that can happen. I mean, if it works organically with anything, or what seems to be organic, is fine. But I doubt whether you can actually use this kind of symbolism indiscriminately and just pass away, and pass it as good art
Mhm.
or great art. I mean, I'm not too sure of this question as well. So I would actually say I don't know what is the best kind of way to represent things, but I can tell that you are free to use them as long as you are convinced that it sort of meshes organically with the kind of things that you are trying to convey creatively. That I think the safest answer that can happen. But I'm very unsure because it sounds very prescriptive of me if I just tell this is the best way, that is the best way. There is no best ways. There are always, there will be innovations, but I haven't seen amazing stuff dropping down, and completely taking me by surprise. In advertising, of course, you see them, but they're too, they lack depth. I don't think they have the depth uh, that they should have. But I mean, advertising is not about depth anyway. So, so personally, I'm in a trap. I don't know what to answer.
Thank you
Could I
so much,
could I
sir.
say something? Could I
Yeah,
say
yeah,
something?
please.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay. So I think, Ritwik, I'm so sorry that maybe you also want to say something. I'll say it and then I won't say too much more. Okay. So, you know, there's no safe space in this world. And making good art involves risk. And what you think is a really safe place now, you will be interpreted in a different way 10 to 15 years later. And I have a problem with Bhimayana. I don't like the fact that they used Narayana and Anand used
Hmm.
uh, uh, Pradhan artists and Pradhan art language to tell Bhimrao Ambedkar's story. Why? Not that Ambedkar himself would not have been engaged with tribal communities. The problem is that tribal communities were always um, rich in not necessarily in cash, but they had rich access to resources of other kinds. The Pradhan community in particular,
Hmm.
but in modern times, I would say in the last 150, continuing to now, they have been disenfranchised and stripped of their resources, and that story is very different from Dalit communities in across India. Not that Dalit communities themselves were not also sometimes very resource rich. It's not true that all Dalit communities were always um, resource poor. Of course, being oppressed is a horrible experience. But what I'm trying to say is the nuances and specificities of a community being made to represent a certain kind of politics is is not comfortable for me. If they had gone through the work of understanding that art form and the journey, that art form developed in the Bharat Bhavan in
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Sure.
Bhopal, man. How
Yeah.
many more resources do you need?
Yes, yes. It's a Bharat Bhavan. Yeah, yeah. It's a yeah, yeah. It's complete.
So I have a little bit of like,
Yeah, I
I always ask those nitpicky questions. So ask yourself that nitpicky question. Any nitpicky questions? I can't tell you how do you keep the balance or appropriate because you are an artist, whoever that asks these kinds of questions from the group, you're the artist. And you have to give yourself the agency to ask those tough questions of your own work. There's no prescription out there that's going to solve the problem. The only thing I can say is ask the tough questions. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Navan actually adds a kind of, I'm sorry, Ritik, again we are taking. Navan actually adds a bit of that, workshops that they took in order to make them understand this and that and how they went about it. That seems also very patronizing. I mean, frankly, I mean, no offense to Anand, but what he's doing is extremely patronizing. It's as if he's sort of projecting himself as somebody who is, using that in order to create something really, from below. That's not the case at all.
There's a kind of
Um,
urgency to being woke. And woke um, is a very safe feeling. Uh, an ethical consciousness in one's work and a moral consciousness is is more old-fashioned words, maybe a little bit, but probably not accepting that an ethical work life, an ethical practice involves a lot of questioning.
uh, thank you so much. Sir, the next question is for Professor Ritwik Balo. According to you, at last, according to you, how has the transition from traditional mediums to digital graphics influenced the portrayal of indigenous presence in modern art? Did it affect the authenticity of the tribal ingenuity? We just talked about this.
Okay, so the way I think about this is that in real life, in praxis, the digital inclusion of tribal art in this case becomes a sort of double-edged sword. It promises visibility. It also promises economic opportunities, but also challenges artists to balance the integrity of their art with the demands of the digital marketplace. Doesn't necessarily have to be digital marketplace, but yes, also to the digital marketplace. And as enthusiasts or art lovers or just readers, or perhaps as the audience, our role in this transaction or in this transition is rather crucial. It is we must advocate for digital literacy and access among indigenous communities while ensuring that these platforms, the platforms that we create, are spaces of respect and appreciation and not of cultural commodification or appropriation, as we have seen in so many examples, right? uh, Again, while the emerging digital markets and technologies offer opportunities for visibility, monetization, and preservation, of course, of tribal art, they also bring new challenges and ethical considerations. As we embrace these innovations, we must remain mindful of their impact on the cultural integrity of tribal art and communities. Our journey through the digital terrain should be guided by respect, first of all, and collaboration and a commitment to preserving the unique voices and stories that tribal art brings to the sort of global tapestry. Now, looking ahead, I foresee a landscape where these emerging technologies, blockchain, NFT, etc., might provide new levels of transparency in the art trade. They might, while as I was saying before, AI could evolve to become a collaborative tool, leading to augmented realities rather than just virtual ones. But as consumers of content on the internet, the impetus is surely on us to ensure the ethical use of tribal art in digital mediums, be it in advertisements, in comics, or through NFTs or AI, so that we can acknowledge the cultural roots and avoid commodification.
Thank you so much, sir. Um, so we are almost at the end of today's session. I thank all the panelists once again for sharing their invaluable perspectives on the topic. This is to remind that we are calling for submissions on tribal art and tribal representation in art, the details of which can be viewed on www.tellmeyourstory.biz. We will come back to you soon with our next panel discussion on the project. Till then, good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much. Thank
It
you.
was